Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I've always felt a little lost in life. Like I never received complete instructions on who I'm supposed to be. Everyone else around me seemed to know exactly who they were. Their lives would fly right by me. Their GPSs locked onto destinations while I just sat idling in the street. In high school, I never did any extracurricular activities because I couldn't figure out if I was a sports person or a music person. I was no different in college. I wandered through 4 different majors, unable to decide who I wanted to be. I just felt like a blank slate. And if I was a blank slate, Micah York was the starry night, authentic, beautiful, and perfect. He was my antithesis, which is what attracted me to him in the first place. At the same time, I resented him. He was born knowing exactly who he was and what he was about. Micah's self-confidence was an all but tangible element of him. I envy the degree of certainty with which he progressed through life. Micah and I first met in our freshman year of college. He was a neuroscience student and I was majoring in history. We dated briefly our sophomore year, after I changed my major to computer sciences. We broke up the following year, just before I decided to pursue a psychology degree instead. In my senior year, shortly after my advisor informed me that I was too late to switch majors again, Micah came to me asking for a favor. Our final semester of college was quickly approaching, and Micah had been applying to grad schools. He wanted to get his master's in neurobiology, and I helped him with the applications when I had time. At the time, Micah was under a lot of stress to nail his senior thesis. For this reason, I found it peculiar when he announced he was throwing a party in January. Micah was a meticulous student, and he didn't throw parties. Ever. In spite of my misgivings, my interest was piqued. When Micah offered me an invitation, I accepted. When I arrived at Micah's off-campus apartment the night of the event, I hesitated before getting out of the car. His apartment was dark and quiet. There was definitely no party. I couldn't help but wonder what he was up to. I picked up my phone to call him, ready to tell him I'd changed my mind, but curiosity suddenly got the better of me and I hung up. Micah's door was unlocked. I let myself in and, hearing voices coming from the living room, headed in that direction. When I arrived, I found 4 people waiting. I knew 2 of them. Micah was there, of course, as was his close friend, an organic chemistry major by the name of Sean Nichols. The other 2 were introduced to me as fellow med student Irina Bradley and as philosophy major Holly Bishop. Irina scooted over and made room for me on the couch. I took a seat and waited for Micah to begin whatever it was he had planned. A moment later he rose and walked to the middle of the room. Thank you all for coming. I'm sure you're wondering why you're here. Clearly, this is no ordinary party. Micah's tone was somber. The truth is, I have something of vital importance to ask each of you. Micah paused, took a deep breath, and dropped his voice an octave. I have selected each of you to take part in the greatest experiment of not only your lives, but perhaps in human history. I am asking you to take part in my doctoral thesis. I rolled my eyes. The presentation was classic Micah. He was many things, pretentious, arrogant, and pompous, but no one in their right mind would call Michael York humble. And what exactly is your thesis? I asked nonchalantly, ignoring his melodramatic posturing. A conclusive essay detailing what happens after human death. Irina laughed. Sadly, I knew Micah well enough to know he was being serious. "How do you intend to prove anything?" I asked. "What kind of experiments have you designed?" "Well, Bridget," he replied, "I'm going to kill myself." The room fell quiet, and Micah, mistaking the shocked horror for awed silence, stood a little taller and smiled. "You can't be serious," I scoffed. "Oh, I am. And it's completely reversible. I am going to be the first person in the world to prove or disprove the existence of an afterlife." "We," Sean corrected him. "Yes," Micah conceded. "We." He continued, "This paper is going to be our ticket into any university in the world. Wars have been waged for centuries over deities and religions, and we are going to prove what is scientifically correct beyond a shadow of a doubt." I sighed. I had heard enough. "You're an idiot," I quipped, and headed for the door. Irina took my lead and stood to take her leave as well. Micah beat both of us to the exit and begged us to reconsider. "Bridget, wait," he pleaded. "Please, hear me out before you walk away." I narrowed my eyes at him and shook my head. "No, Micah," I said. "I'm not interested in killing anyone, not even you." Holly, who had been silent until that moment, chimed in coolly. "I'd like to hear how it works." Well, Sean began. "I designed the process. It begins with injections of a specialized combination of chemical agents." He registered the look of concern on our faces and sought to reassure us. "Don't worry. It's been tested, and it's safe." "Tested?" Irina cried. "On whom?" "On local wildlife." "No human trials?" I asked. "Not yet, but it is safe," Sean said quickly. "So then," Irina asked, "how does it work?" She took a step back toward the couch, intrigued. With a gesture, Micah signaled Sean to continue. "I've developed both a poison and a biologic. I call them Romeo and Juliet. Juliet is a poison that kills the body. Romeo is a biological antidote that revives it. Subjects will lie in a state of clinical death for just 30 seconds. Micah cut in. "No brain damage, no organ damage." "Yes, it is perfectly safe. He will only be dead for a short time," Sean confirmed. "So, flatliners?" I glared at Micah. "What?" Sean asked. "Flatliners," I repeated. "It's a movie. The characters kill themselves and bring themselves back. As I recall, it didn't work out very well. Micah is obsessed with the film, so he already knows that." "That's a Hollywood movie," Micah said dryly. "This is legitimate science." "No. You're Kiefer Sutherland." I pointed at him. "He's Kevin Bacon." I pointed at Sean. "And I'm Julia Roberts." "That's absurd," Micah said hotly. "You're not Julia Roberts, Bridget." "She is." He pointed at Holly. "Am I Oliver Platt, then?" Irina asked. "No one is Oliver Platt," Micah shouted. "Well, if we get to choose, I'd rather be Oliver Platt than Kevin Bacon," Sean interrupted. "You're Kevin Bacon," Micah spat. "And you're Kiefer Sutherland!" I yelled at him. "This isn't Flatliners!" I sighed. "I'm not going under." "No, Bridget, you're not." Micah looked exasperated. "Then why am I here?" Micah ran a hand through his dark brown hair. I've been trying to get to that. Am I going under? Irina asked. No. Just me, Sean, and Holly. And you think she's going to agree to that? I asked, incredulous. Actually, Holly interrupted, raising from the couch. I already have. Why? I gaped at her. Because I want to know, need to know, why I'm here. Why any of us are here. I want to know what the soul is and where it goes. I want to hold the keys to human existence, love and suffering, life and death. I want to understand our purpose. Plus, I'm getting paid, and it's perfect for my dissertation. That's another thing, Micah said quickly. Everyone will get paid. How much? Irina narrowed her eyes at him. $500 each. I groaned. I was short on tuition for the semester by exactly that amount. Micah knew it, and intended to take advantage of me. The Romeo and Juliet agents are safe. They've been tried and tested, and they will work. Sean and I have rented a house on Emerald Street to conduct the experiment. All I need, all I'm asking, is for you to show up, Bridget. To show up next Saturday. And what about me? Asked Irina. Irina, I need you to administer the agents and monitor our vital signs. The process will take less than a minute, and afterwards, you and Bridget can both walk away with your $500 and a credit on my thesis. You've got no evidence to support your conclusions, I countered. What makes you so sure everything will go according to plan? The agent Sean developed will be available to anyone and everyone, and they can repeat my experiment at their own leisure. But I don't think that... Please, Bridget, just show up on Saturday. Every facet of Micah's experiment made me profoundly uncomfortable. But the way Micah looked at me, the tension in the room, the $500... Bridget, I'm not asking. Micah grabbed my hands and squeezed. I'm begging. I'll think about it, I said. Micah was cocky, but also undeniably brilliant. In the top 1 percentile of his class, with several published papers to his name. I couldn't help but wonder, what if the experiment worked? What if he was right? What if he found what he was looking for? Stories of near-death experiences had been reported by people throughout the world for centuries. In his experiment, Micah intended to delve deeper than anyone before, in a controlled environment, in a manner that could be duplicated. The implications were staggering. I arrived at the house on Emerald Street the following Saturday. Curiosity had gotten the best of me in spite of my many reservations. Micah had been expecting me and flashed a smile when he met me at the door. From there, he escorted me to an expansive, sparsely furnished living room. Aside from 3 cheap-looking twin beds, a few camcorders, and some hospital equipment, the room was empty. Sean and Holly were already laying on 2 of the beds with nervous smiles in their faces and IVs in their arms. Irina appeared incredibly stressed as she bustled around checking equipment. Micah approached and handed me a heavy, expensive-looking camera. The cameras at the end of our beds are already recording. They're our static cameras. I need you to walk around and record with this one as well. Irina is going to stagger our injections so that she can handle all 3 of us. Your task is to film the experiment and nothing more. Okay, Micah, are you sure you want to do this? Bridget, we've tested this. And as long as Romeo is injected in under a minute, which it will be, there is no risk. There is definitely risk, Micah. Near-death experiences? This isn't a near-death experience, Bridget. It's a near-death experiment. Look, I know you're worried. And that's why I wanted you here, to make sure nothing goes wrong. Even if it does, I have volumes of documentation proving that it was my experiment. Yeah, but... I began to object, but stopped short. I realized I had nothing else to say. Micah would have an answer for any doubts I expressed. That's the way he was. There was no stopping him. I could either bear witness or be elsewhere and simply hear about it. I chose to stay. Micah walked over and stood in front of my camera. It's 12:51 p.m. on Saturday, January 14th. My name is Micah York, and this is the first attempt of the Afterlife experiment. Micah walked over to his bed, sat down, and gave a nod to Irina. She found a vein and expertly inserted a needle. When she was finished, Micah reclined and addressed Sean and Holly. Remember to speak directly to your cameras immediately after you regain conscious in order to report your feelings. They both nodded. Okay, everyone, Irina said, failing to conceal her trepidation with mock bravado. Everything is ready. All right, Micah said with excitement. 30 seconds. He turned to Irina. Once the last of the Juliet leaves the tube, you know what to do. Micah pointed to the digital timers at the head of each bed, each of them set to 30 seconds. Irina nodded. Bridget, are you ready? I nodded. See you on the other side, he told me with a smile. Micah gave Holly and Sean a thumbs up. They returned it and then settled back on their beds. I hit record. Irina picked up 3 red tubes from a nearby table. Steadying her hands, she quickly injected the first tube into Micah's IV. His heart rate monitor flatlined instantly. I flinched as the abrupt squeal caught me by surprise. While I attempted to steady the camera, Irina hit the timer above Micah's bed, hurriedly moved over to Sean and did the same for him, and then Holly. Irina put her hands over her ears in a futile bid to muffle the discordant shriek of the 3 EKG machines. Get this! She called to me. Bridget, record this! She pointed to Micah's EEG, which displayed 0 active brainwaves. Get Holly and Sean's, too! I began to panic. The experiment was a bad idea, a very bad idea. I returned my gaze to Micah's timer, which had just 8 seconds remaining on it. Irina had already prepared the green tube containing the Romeo biologic and was on standby, ready to inject Micah with it. The cacophonous squeal of the EKG machines was deafening. Each high-pitched beep seemed to scream. Do something! Do it now! Why are you just standing there? Save them! Just when I thought I couldn't stand any more suspense, a different alarm buzzed. Irina wasted no time injecting Micah with the antidote. I waited with bated breath for Micah's vital monitors to show signs of life. Less than 5 seconds later, his EKG monitor registered 1 spike, and then another. Moments later, Micah's EEG machine flared to life as well. I exhaled. Irina stepped over to Sean to prepare the injection of his dose of Romeo, when Micah suddenly shot up in bed, eyes wide, and opened his mouth. I was so excited and curious that I almost forgot to hold the camera up. I couldn't wait to hear what he had to say. But Micah didn't say anything. He screamed. The suddenness and force of it, the most blood-curdling scream thing I had ever heard, caught me off guard, and I stumbled backwards into a wall and dropped the camcorder. Then Sean started screaming. Micah ignored everyone else and flung himself out of his bed. Before Irina and I had any idea what was happening, he began smashing his head against the hardwood floor, connecting with the hard oak over and over again. Beside him, Sean jumped terror-stricken out of bed, knocking Irina out of the way in the process, and ran to a nearby wall. He stopped an inch or 2 from it and shrieked in its direction. Not at the wall, but through it, oblivious to his surroundings. What happened? I begged. What did you see? My shock gave way to hysteria as Micah quickly became less recognizable with every sickening crunch of his skull against the floorboards. By then I had long abandoned any efforts to document the calamity along with the camcorder. "Irina, help me!" I cried. Irina, who hadn't moved since Sean had knocked her out of the way, stared at me wide-eyed. "We need to get him off the floor. He's hurting himself." She opened her palm and looked down at the one remaining tube of the Romeo biologic as if she'd never seen it before. "You didn't give that to her yet?" I shrieked wildly. "Give that to Holly, now!" I rushed to Micah and held him in my arms. All the while he continued to howl uncontrollably, smashing his head against a floor which was no longer there. The combined effect of he and Sean's ear-splitting, torturous screaming and the look of horror on Micah's face, his mouth forever open in a wide O, nearly drove me to tears. Meanwhile, Irina, blinded by the tears streaming from her own eyes, frantically performed chest compressions on Holly. It was too late. Holly was lost. "Irina!" I called. "Irina, call 911!" She ignored me, or hadn't heard me, and continued working on Holly. I let go of Micah briefly to grab my phone. Before I could stop him, he took off, running toward the front door. "Micah, stop!" I shouted. A moment later, he smashed head first into the glass. If Sean noticed the commotion, he didn't show it. He only screamed those piercing, horrible screams. Emergency services couldn't hear me on the phone, but they had someone at the house within 5 minutes. A very, very long 5 minutes. Irina gave up on Holly at some point and resigned herself to pacing around the room, mumbling. I don't understand. I did it right. I don't understand." The first responders took Sean, Holly, and Micah away in an ambulance, and they took me and Irina to the police station. They watched the videos. I never graduated, but I managed to avoid jail time. Irina was not so fortunate. After her trial and conviction, I retreated into myself and refused to speak to anyone. I spent months holed up in my apartment, asking the same question over and over. What did they see? It's not as if I could ask them. Sean screamed until he lost the use of his voice permanently, and was later admitted to a mental health facility, where he faces one of the walls in his room, with his mouth wide open, as if he was screaming. Somehow, it's worse than if he actually was screaming. Sean hasn't said or written a word since the day of the experiment. Mike has been institutionalized as well. Sometimes he screams and sometimes he's quiet. Sometimes he thrashes and sometimes he lies as still as the dead. I visited both he and Sean many times, begging them to tell me what they saw. My efforts were fruitless until my most recent visit. When I last visited Micah, he was in one of his screaming phases. I sat with him and let him scream, waiting to see if he would transition to one of his catatonic stages so that I could speak. When I was tired of waiting, I leaned in close to his ear and asked him, "Micah, what did you see?" His screaming slowly morphed into an insane, uncontrollable laughter, the likes of which I had never heard before. His doctor, who'd been just outside the room, came running in. "What did you do?" he asked, alarmed. I just asked him a question," I responded quietly. "What was the question?" I asked him what he saw." We both noticed the sudden silence at the same time. We slowly turned toward Micah to find him facing us, expressionless. "It's all waiting for you," he said slowly. "It's waiting for all of us." His mouth fell open into a large O, and the laughter slowly began again, followed by shrill, horrible screams. I immediately regretted my decision to visit and left the hospital in tears, wishing I'd never met Micah. As I drove home, however, I couldn't help but continue to wonder, what did they see? What's on the other side? Do I even want to know? But I suppose it really doesn't matter anymore. Someday I'll find out. And so will you. It's only a matter of time before the wait is over.
The last storm was already on the horizon when I awoke that Sunday morning. It hung in the south, a solid black wall of dust, churning and seemingly motionless. I'd every intention of sleeping late into the morning, as had been my Sunday custom since Adele and the girls had left. But the distant rumbling and crackle of lightning drug me from bed just after sunrise. I shuffled drowsily around the farm in the early morning, lashing the doors of the barn, rounding up the 2 stubborn hogs and shuttering the windows. But soon I found myself rooted in place, captivated by the writhing shape in the sky. It stretched impossibly wide across the open sky, rolling across the border from Nebraska. The air had a dry, electric chill, and already the sickly yellow wheat swayed in anticipation. I was in a trance, eyes locked on the distance, when I saw a small light dust plume to the west, picked out in stark contrast with the black beyond. The horse and rider at the base of the little dust devil approached the farm at a sharp trot, and my dust-bleary eyes registered the silhouette. Carl Jordan had owned the farm next to mine for as long as my family has been in the Dakotas. I grew up with his great booming laughter warming our home nearly every night. His usual broad, yellowing smile was absent beneath the recently trimmed mustache and broad-rimmed black hat. His dark suit was blotted with a fine layer of grit that he brushed absently at.
Eddie!
His voice was tired and small as he looked down at me.
No church today?
I hadn't been in months, and he'd once admitted to envying me. I just didn't see the need any longer, and I've relished the extra hours. I ignored the question. "What's troubling you, Carl? Maddie all right?" I asked. He turned towards the south, to the storm, and sucked loudly on his lower lip. After a few moments of thought, he sighed deeply with a phlegmy rumble.
The Hattersons are dead. All of them, except Saul.
He said evenly, not returning his gaze to mine. I drank this in for a moment, feeling the insides of my sinuses beginning to burn in the cool and arid breeze. I briefly dwelt upon the image of the youngest Hatterson, a tow-headed toddler with the dim-looking smile I'd seen at the general store with Saul and Molly a few days prior. "How?" I asked finally. He grimaced slightly, still gazing south.
Saul's missing. No one's seen him since last night. Molly and the kids are dead and Saul's gone. It don't sound good.
Carl slumped forward a little, and I saw, not for the first time, how old he was.
The whole hornet's nest is stirred up over in Picton. They was going to lose the farm, they say.
Fleetingly, it concerned me that I could easily see the connection between these facts.
Maddie's fine. Just a little ill this morning. Thanks for asking.
He said, after another silent moment. He broke from the black clouds and fixed his eyes on me. He offered a pale imitation of his familiar smile, but his eyes remained squinted tight, haunted. He looked as if he had more to say, but at last he just nodded and gathered the reins.
Be safe, Eddie,
he said, a phrase worn smooth by repeated use, and turned towards his farm, trotting quickly, head still crooked towards the storm. By noon, I could only watch as it reached up and blotted out the sun. The dust storm enveloped us, obscuring the sky like the hands of God. I did my best to ration the allotment of bourbon I'd poured off that morning, watching the black winds scour the earth through a broken shutter slat. During the storms of the years before, pale and weak compared to this tempest, Adele would huddle with the girls to read scripture, inevitably ending with the revelations in hushed, reverent tones. I tried not to scowl at her fear and awe before, but now I could feel a little tremor of doubt in me as I looked out at the sackcloth sky. When the sky darkened a few shades at nightfall, I prepared a small meal of bread and fried eggs and drained the rest of the bourbon. Later, I laid in the unmade bed with the world spinning, the sky howling outside, and tried not to think. The storm raged stronger than ever the next morning, the sun winking through the maelstrom, a fat circle of hazy orange like a fading coal. Late in the day, it showed no sign of abating, and I resigned to leave the house, if only to feed the animals. I tied my goggles to my head and a damp bandana around my mouth, but I still gasped at the ragged burn of the dust when I stepped outside into the storm. The lining of my throat seemed to crack and bleed within moments. I could barely see the barn, but I set out instinctually towards it. A tall hillock of fine black dust was pressed into the side, and it took me a few kicks to clear the door. The dust had seeped in everywhere, and the hogs and cows were covered in a layer of grime. They stood still in their pens, eyes red and glassy, shuddering and jerking with each loud creak from the roof beams. They ignored the food. There was a twisting coil of anxiety in my chest when Carl arrived, leading the terrified horse behind him. His beard was matted with dust, and he had to sweep the lenses of his goggles clean at my doorstep. But instead of entering, he only waved me out to join him.
You need to come with me,
He shouted over the storm. The dust between his teeth had formed a thin black mud that flecked at the corners of his mouth. It was his tone, flat and even, that terrified me. I didn't argue, but pulled on goggles and offered him a second bandana. I followed close behind him, one hand on the horse's haunch. Carl picked his way down the path, navigating by some uncanny memory of the curves in the little road. We walked cautiously and deliberately west for the better part of half a mile, past Carl's own farm, towards the leaning shape of the Collins farm. A throbbing dread began to stir in my breast as we approached. The door was thrown wide open, and off one of its hinges, swinging violently in the wind. I could see Roger Collins, slumped in the doorframe, the congealing blood on his forehead caked with the fine dirt. His eyes were open. The left eye beneath the bullet hole was flooded red and tilted wildly skyward. Clutched in his curled hands was a rifle with one spent casing. Abigail Collins and her youngest were inside, curled tightly around each other in the corner of the room. The flowers of blood that bloomed on the fabric of their dresses was bright and vivid. Slumped upright at the dinner table, as if ready for a meal, was another figure, filthy and caked with black dust. He seemed composed, sitting upright and proud despite the pinprick bullet hole, clean and bloodless, standing starkly in the center of his throat. His grimy skin was dried and shriveled. His eyes were closed, the lids sunken over the pits. It took a long, yawning moment to recognize the desiccated face. Saul Hatterson, hands clasped around a little revolver, looking for all the world like he'd been dead for a week. Saul Hatterson, grinning obscenely wide, showing dried black gums. Despite the roaring storm, there was an unearthly stillness in the little house, and I could hear my heart thudding in my ears. I turned to Carl with pitiful expression, a plea for some sort of understanding.
I was bringing them some canned food. Roger was worried about being able to last out a long store.
He shouted from the front porch, where he was closing Roger's eyes and wiping the blood from his hand. He looked up at me and stood.
Jed's missing.
I gazed around the room again, before turning to Carl. You don't think that Jed... I began, letting the idea remain unsaid. Jed was a quiet and sickly kid, but something about him had always set my teeth on edge.
No,
he barked.
I don't think a 15-year-old could be capable of this. But I didn't think Saul was either. None of this makes any sense.
He brushed the lenses of his goggles clean once more. No, it does not, I agreed.
We should head into Picton to tell someone, but I need you to drive the Collins Ford. I can make it between our 3 farms on foot reliably enough, but I don't think me or that horse could make it all the way into town.
Carl looked mildly embarrassed, hidden as he was behind dust and beard, and I followed him into the barn. The Model A made a few grinding rasps before dying completely, refusing to respond to anything. When I opened the gas cap, a damp and clumping mixture of dust and gasoline tumbled from the little opening. My breath came in increasingly shallow gasps as we moved to the Collins tractor, unscrewing the cap. The same reeking clay was stuffed to the top of the tank. The walk back towards our farms was silent, my heart pounding as I struggled to keep my breathing steady, as the inside of my sinuses were scoured raw. First Carl's tractor, then we checked mine. Both were useless and clogged with dust. If Carl was as panicked as I was, he refused to show it.
Eddie, I don't know what this means, but I think I'd appreciate it if you stayed with me and Maddie tonight. The storm has to let up in the morning, I'm sure.
He yelled to me as we crouched over my tractor, the sky dimming. I could see at last the spark of fear in his eyes, and it brought me a little solace. Carl went ahead, panicky with thoughts of Maddie sick in bed on her own, and I agreed to follow shortly. I entered my house to gather my shotgun and a tin of coffee. I don't believe I intended to start drinking, but the bloody and crooked eye was shining wetly in my memory, and I drew from the bourbon a few soothing pulls. I recall being tired and weary from the day's grim business, but I don't remember lying down on the cool wood of the floor. When I woke, gripping the gun and an empty bottle, the sky was lighter, but the whirling black clouds still surrounded the world on all sides. Tuesday, I thought through a fog of pain. Or was it Wednesday? I groggily allowed the shame to flood in when I realized I'd left Carl and Maddie waiting all night. After finding all the water drained the night before, I dressed for the storm and headed out to the well, with a pump handle strained against me as I pressed downward, bringing up the first sounds of water. What came out of the pump was black and viscous, a thin black paste. I dropped the tin bucket in disgust, feeling yesterday's dread igniting the alcohol ache, and I turned quickly towards Carl's farm. On the road, with my destination not yet visible, I turned to see behind me. There wasn't even the faint outline of my barn. In that moment, I was alone, surrounded by a wall of vibrating earth and wind on all sides. It could have been all of creation, and I would never know. It could be the end of creation, and I would never know. I turned back towards Carl's farm and began to run in a panic, frantically hoping I had not altered direction. As the small, unpainted house came into view, I saw Carl's horse, lying motionless on the ground, still tied to the railing on the porch. A small dune of black dust had formed against one side. The door was wide open, slamming into the wall with a sharp crack at each breath from the storm. My panic spiked like a fever when I stepped inside, and my body began shaking violently. Maddie lay spilled from her bed, trailing sheets and a shredded fragment of her nightgown. Her head was twisted, the neck bruised and bent, and bulging glassy eyes seemed to stare directly at me. Her tongue was thick and black between her teeth. Seated on the bed above her, spindly legs dangling over the edge, was the dried and leathery corpse of Jed Collins, the missing boy. His eye sockets gaped empty and black as he silently grinned out at the world. Carl was nowhere to be found. I backed out quietly from the house, at last truly toning out the chaotic roar of the storm. My mind spun, trying to make sense of the utter madness, and it stoked the fires inside me. Panting, desperate dread flooding my limbs until I found myself propelled blind, running through the storm toward my home. I continued past the hulking silhouette of my barn, legs flooding with fire as I sucked in great lungfuls of choking dust. I thought nothing of destination. I only wanted to get as far away from the storm as possible, far from the empty charnel houses of my neighbors and from the empty eyes and wicked grins. I made it as far as the thin fork of the Missouri that carves the edge of my land. I saw, through the wall of shifting haze, the black outline of the river from a distance. When I approached, legs slowing and lungs burning, I saw the river more clearly, wide and unearthly still. The water was black and thick, and in mute disbelief, I watched it flow, slowly like molasses under a dark and churning sky. And then I began to understand. I nailed the shutters closed, driven by an animal urgency of purpose. The door I braced with Adele's heirloom cabinet, allowing it to crack and splinter on its side as I stacked a steamer chest on top. I didn't really believe that this would slow whatever would come tonight in the howling darkness, but I wanted to have the time to know, to be sure. The last bourbon bottle lay empty on the floor, and I was glad for this, for the chance to be clean-headed at last. I sat back to the wall, facing the door with the shotgun in my hands, and I waited. The sky darkened, and the storm continued to howl. I measured my breaths, trying to hold on to that moment of calm, to stretch it out until it dried and snapped apart. It was late at night When it arrived, I could hear the heavy footsteps circling the porch, pulling lightly, testing each shutter. My hands were suddenly slick with sweat on the barrel of the shotgun. The shuffling footsteps stopped in front of the door, and I saw the wood flex ever so slightly as pressure was applied. A scraping sound began to rise, hissing from the small barricade as it began to slide slowly across the floor. The force on the other side of the door increased slowly, steadily, grinding against the heavy barricade until the door was open to the storm and to the night and beyond. The figure swept into the room with a silent grace that surprised me and stood regarding me. Carl's skin seemed to crackle and go taut like paper as he moved, and in the hollow of his empty eyes were tiny, twisting clouds of dust, blue ribbons of electricity arcing across the sockets. He was smiling, a smile I'd never seen from him, a wide, obscene grin. I felt a strange sort of calm then, the surety of knowing, despite the impossible madness of it all. I raised the shotgun. The thing inside Carl hissed in a voice like grinding sand. The corpse took another step towards me, and I saw a black trickle of mud from the edge of its cracked lips.
Go ahead and shoot. See what it gets you.
I smiled back at him, seeing the solution so clearly at last. I took a moment to be thankful that Adele and the girls were gone. Thankful, in an awful way, that I'd struck her hard enough for her to finally leave me. This would not be the night that they'd die. It had moved halfway across the room now, shuffling towards me. The malevolent spark of its eyes locked on me. The now familiar dread reared up to swallow my temporary peace. In the black whirlpool of its eyes, I saw the great storm, covering the entire earth in a final gloom. I saw trails and chains of endless murder and atrocity crisscrossing the darkened world into that last eternal night. I saw the end. All I had left was a little sliver of hope, enough to spur me onward. I swung the shotgun up under my chin, feeling the cool of the barrel on my skin. The thing inside Carl jerked to a halt and ceased to smile. And I knew I gambled right this time. It needed me. And it can't have me. I made sure I was smiling, drinking in the thing's rage and frustration. The thing roared, and with a leap, burst from Carl's body, his drying muscles snapping and shredding into long, fraying fibers as it shed him like a coat, thudding to the floor behind. It was a swirling cloud, a flurry of dust, coursing with lightning and pure elemental hatred that I saw then, surging towards me faster than I would have believed possible. Thin tendrils coiled and tightened and wound their way through air, twisting towards my mouth and nose. I could feel them caress the raw passages of my lungs, hot, twisting, and unmistakably, horribly alive as they slid into me. I pulled the trigger.
The last question was asked for the first time, half in jest, on May 21st, 2061, at a time when humanity first stepped into the light. The question came about as a result of a $5 bet over highballs, and it happened this way. Alexander Adele and Bertram Lupoff were two of the faithful attendants of Multivac. As well as any human beings could, they knew what lay behind the cold, clicking, flashing face. Miles and miles of face of that giant computer. They had at least a vague notion of the general plan of relays and circuits that had long since grown past the point where any single human could possibly have a firm grasp of the whole. Multivac was self-adjusting and self-correcting. It had to be, for nothing human could adjust and correct it quickly enough or even adequately enough. So Adele and Lupoff attended the monstrous giant only lightly and superficially, yet as well as any men could. They fed it data, adjusted questions to its needs, and translated the answers that were issued. Certainly they, and all others like them, were fully entitled to share in the glory that was Multivac's. For decades, Multivac had helped design the ships and plot the trajectories that had enabled man to reach the Moon, Mars, and Venus. But past that, Earth's poor resources could not support the ships. Too much energy was needed for the long trips. Earth exploited its coal and uranium with increasing efficiency, but there was only so much of both. But slowly, Multivac learned enough to answer deeper questions more fundamentally, and on May 14th, 2061, what had been theory became fact. The energy of the sun was stored, converted, and utilized directly on a planet-wide scale. All Earth turned off its burning coal, its fissioning uranium, and flipped the switch that connected all of it to a small station, 1 mile in diameter, circling the Earth, at half the distance of the Moon. All Earth ran by invisible beams of sun power. 7 days had not sufficed to dim the glory of it, and Adele and Lupoff finally managed to escape from the public functions and to meet in quiet where no one would think of looking for them, in the deserted underground chambers, where portions of the mighty buried body of Multivac showed, unattended, idling, sorting data with contented lazy clickings. Multivac, too, had earned its vacation, and the boys appreciated that. They had no intention, originally, of disturbing it. They had brought a bottle with them, and their only concern at the moment was to relax in the company of each other and the bottle. "It's amazing when you think of it," said Adele. His broad face had lines of weariness in it, and he stirred his drink slowly with a glass rod, watching the cubes of ice slur clumsily about. "All the energy we can possibly ever use for free, enough energy, if we wanted to draw on it, to melt all Earth into a big drop of impure liquid iron, and still never miss the energy so used. All the energy we could ever use, forever and forever and forever." Lupoff cocked his head sideways. He had a trick of doing that when he wanted to be contrary, and he wanted to be contrary now, partly because he had to carry the ice and glassware. "Not forever," he said. "Oh, hell, just about forever. Till the sun runs down, Bert." "That's not forever." "All right, then. Billions and billions of years. 10 billion, maybe. Are you satisfied?" Lupoff put his fingers through his thinning hair as though to reassure himself that some was still left, and sipped gently at his own drink. 10 billion years isn't forever." "Well, it will last our time, won't it?" "So would the coal and uranium." "All right, but now we can hook up each individual spaceship to the solar station, and it can go to Pluto and back 1,000,000 times without ever worrying about fuel. You can't do that on coal and uranium. Ask Multivac if you don't believe me." "I don't have to ask Multivac. I know that." "Then stop running down what Multivac's done for us," said Adele, blazing up. "It did all right." "Who says it didn't? What I say is that a sun won't last forever. That's all I'm saying. We'll say for 10 billion years, but then what?" Lupoff pointed a slightly shaky finger at the other. And don't say we'll switch to another sun. There was silence for a while. Adele put his glass to his lips, only occasionally, and Lupoff's eyes slowly closed. They rested. Then Lupoff's eyes snapped open. You're thinking we'll switch to another sun when ours is done, aren't you? I'm not thinking. Sure you are. You're weak on logic. That's the trouble with you. You're like the guy in the story who was caught in a sudden shower and who ran to a grove of trees and got under one. He wasn't worried, you see, because he figured that when one tree got wet through, he would just get under another one. I get it, said Adele. Don't shout. When the sun is done, the other stars will be gone too. Darn right they will, muttered Lupoff. It all had a beginning in the original cosmic explosion, whatever that was, and it'll all have an end when all the stars run down. Some run down faster than others. Hell, the gas giants won't last 100 million years. The sun will last 10 billion years, and maybe the dwarfs will last 200 billion for all the good they are. But just give us 1 trillion years, and everything will be dark. Entropy has to increase to maximum. That's all. I know about entropy, said Adele, standing on his dignity. The hell you do. I know as much as you do. Then you know everything has got to run down someday. All right. Who says they won't? You did, you poor sap. You said we had all the energy we needed forever. You said forever. It was Adele's turn to be contrary. Maybe we can build things up again someday, he said. Never. Why not? Someday. Never. Ask Multivac. You ask Multivac. I dare you. $5 says it can't be done. Adele was drunk enough to try, just sober enough to be able to phrase the necessary symbols and operations into a question which, in words, might have corresponded to this. Will mankind one day, without the net expenditure of energy, be able to restore the sun to its full youthfulness, even after it had died of old age? Or maybe it could be put more simply like this. How can the net amount of entropy of the universe be massively decreased? Multivac fell dead and silent. The slow flashing of lights ceased. The distant sounds of clicking relays ended. Then, just as the frightened technicians felt they could hold their breath no longer, there was a sudden springing to life of the teletype attached to that portion of Multivac. 5 words were printed. Insufficient data for meaningful answer. No bet, whispered Lupoff. They left hurriedly. By next morning, the two, plagued with throbbing head and cottony mouth, had forgotten the incident. Jared, Geraldine, and Geraldette 1 and 2 watched the starry picture in the visiplate change as the passage through hyperspace was completed in its non-time-lapse. At once, the even powdering of stars gave way to the predominance of a single bright shining disk, the size of a marble, centered on the viewing screen. That's X-23, said Jared confidently. His thin hands clamped tightly behind his back, and the knuckles whitened. The little Jaredettes, both girls, had experienced the hyperspace passage for the first time in their lives, and were self-conscious of the momentary feeling of inside-outness. They buried their giggles and chased one another wildly about their mother, screaming, "We've reached X-23! We've reached X-23! We've—" "Quiet, children," said Geraldine sharply. "Are you sure, Jared?" "What is there to be but sure?" said Jared, glancing up at the bulge of featureless metal just under the ceiling. It ran the length of the room, disappearing through the wall at either end. It was as long as the ship. Jared scarcely knew a thing about the thick rod of metal except that it was called a microvac, that one asked it questions if one wished, that if one did not, it still had its task of guiding the ship to a pre-ordered destination, of feeding on energies from the various subgalactic power stations, of computing the equations for the hyperspatial jumps. Jared and his family had only to wait and live in the comfortable residence quarters of the ship. Someone had once told Jared that the AC at the end of microvac stood for automatic computer in ancient English, but he was on the edge of forgetting even that. Geraldine's eyes were moist as she watched the visiplate.
I can't help it. I feel funny about leaving Earth.
Why, for Pete's sake? Demanded Jared. We had nothing there. We'll have everything on X-23. You won't be alone. You won't be a pioneer. There are over 1 million people on the planet already. Good Lord, our great-grandchildren will be looking for new worlds because X-23 will be overcrowded. Then, after a reflective pause, I tell you, it's a lucky thing the computers worked out interstellar travel the way the race is growing.
I know,
said Geraldine miserably. Jaredette 1 said promptly,
Our microvac is the best microvac in the world.
I think so too, said Jared, tussling her hair. It was a nice feeling to have a microvac of your own, and Jared was glad he was part of his generation and no other. In his father's youth, the only computers had been tremendous machines taking up 100 square miles of land. There was only one to a planet. Planetary ACs, they were called. They had been growing in size steadily for 1,000 years, and then, all at once, came refinement. In place of transistors had come molecular valves, so that even the largest planetary AC could be put into a space only half the volume of a spaceship. Jared felt uplifted, as he always did when he thought that his own personal microvac was many times more complicated than the ancient and primitive multivac that had first tamed the sun, and almost as complicated as Earth's planetary AC, the largest, that had first solved the problem of hyperspatial travel and had made trips to the stars possible.
So many stars. So many planets,
sighed Geraldine, busy with her own thoughts.
I suppose families will be going out to new planets forever, the way we are now.
Not forever, said Jared with a smile. It will all stop someday, but not for billions of years, many billions. Even the stars run down, you know. Entropy must increase.
What's entropy, Daddy?
Shrilled Jaredette 2. Entropy, little sweet, is just a word which means the amount of running down of the universe. Everything runs down, you know, like your little walkie-talkie robot, remember?
Can't you just put in a new power unit, like with my robot?
The stars are the power units, dear. Once they're gone, there are no more power units. Jaredette 1 at once set up a howl.
Don't let them, Daddy! Don't let the stars run down! Now look what you've done,
whispered Geraldine, exasperated. How was I to know it would frighten them? Jared whispered back.
Ask the microvac,
wailed Jaredette 1.
Ask him how to turn the stars on again. Go ahead,
said Geraldine.
It will quiet them down.
Jaredette 2 was beginning to cry also. Jared shrugged. Now, honeys, I'll ask the microvac. Don't worry, he'll tell us. He asked the microvac, adding quickly, print the answer. Jared cupped the strip of thin cellufilm and said cheerfully, See now, the microvac says it will take care of everything when the time comes, so don't worry. Geraldine said,
And now, children, it's time for bed. We'll be in our new home soon.
Jared read the words on the cellufilm again before destroying it. Insufficient data for a meaningful answer. He shrugged and looked at the visiplate. X-23 was just ahead. VJ-23X of Lameth stared into the black depths of the three-dimensional small-scale map of the galaxy and said, "Are we ridiculous, I wonder, in being so concerned about the matter?" MQ-17J of Nikron shook his head. "I think not. You know the galaxy will be filled in 5 years at the present rate of expansion." Both seemed in their early 20s. Both were tall and perfectly formed. "Still," said VJ-23X, "I hesitate to submit a pessimistic report to the Galactic Council." "I wouldn't consider any other kind of report. Stir them up a bit. We've got to stir them up." VJ-23X sighed. "Space is infinite. 100 billion galaxies are there for the taking. More." 100 billion is not infinite, and it's getting less infinite all the time. Consider, 20,000 years ago, mankind first solved the problem of utilizing stellar energy, and a few centuries later, interstellar travel became possible. It took mankind 1,000,000 years to fill one small world, and then only 15,000 to fill the rest of the galaxy. Now, the population doubles every 10 years. VJ-23X interrupted. "We can thank immortality for that." "Very well. Immortality exists, and we have to take it into account. I admit it has its seamy side, this immortality. The galactic AC has solved many problems for us. But in solving the problems of preventing old age and death, it has undone all its other solutions." "Yet, you wouldn't want to abandon life, I suppose." "Not at all," snapped MQ-17J, softening it at once to, "Not yet. I'm by no means old enough. How old are you?" 223. "And you?" "I'm still under 200. But to get back to my point, population doubles every 10 years. Once this galaxy is filled, we'll have filled another in 10 years. Another 10 years, and we'll have filled 2 more. Another decade, 4 more. In 100 years, we'll have filled 1,000 galaxies. In 1,000 years, 1,000,000 galaxies. In 10,000 years, the entire known universe. Then what?" VJ-23X said, "As a side issue, there's a problem of transportation. I wonder how many sun power units it will take to move galaxies of individuals from one galaxy to the next." "A very good point. Already, mankind consumes 2 sun power units per year." "Most of it's wasted. After all, our own galaxy alone pours out 1,000 sun power units a year, and we only use 2 of those." "Granted, but even with 100% efficiency, we only stave off the end. Our energy requirements are going up in a geometric progression even faster than our population. We'll run out of energy even sooner than we run out of galaxies." "A good point. A very good point." "We'll just have to build new stars out of interstellar gas." "Or out of dissipated heat?" asked MQ-17J sarcastically. "There may be some way to reverse entropy. We ought to ask Galactic AC." VJ-23X was not really serious, but MQ-17J pulled out his AC contact from his pocket and placed it on the table before him. "I've half a mind to," he said. "It's something the human race will have to face someday." He stared somberly at his small AC contact. It was only 2 inches cubed, and nothing in itself, but it was connected through hyperspace with the great galactic AC that served all mankind. hyperspace considered, it was an integral part of the galactic AC. MQ-17J paused to wonder if someday in his immortal life he would get to see the galactic AC. It was on a little world of its own, a spider webbing of force beams, holding the matter within which surges of submesons took the place of the old clumsy molecular valves. Yet, despite its subetheric workings, the galactic AC was known to be a full 1,000 feet across. MQ-17J asked suddenly of his AC contact, "Can entropy ever be reversed?" VJ-23X looked startled and said at once, "Oh, say, I didn't really mean to have you ask that." "Why not?" "We both know entropy can't be reversed. You can't turn smoke and ash back into a tree." "Do you have trees on your world?" asked MQ-17J. The sound of the galactic AC startled them into silence. Its voice came thin and beautiful out of the small AC contact on the desk. It said,
"There is insufficient data for a meaningful answer."
VJ-23X said, "See." The two men thereupon returned to the question of the report they were to make to the Galactic Council. Z-Prime's mind spanned the new galaxy with a faint interest in the countless twist of stars that powdered it. He had never seen this one before. Would he ever see them all? So many of them, each with its load of humanity, but a load that was almost a dead weight. More and more the real essence of men was to be found out here, in space. Minds, not bodies. The immortal bodies remained back on the planets, in suspension, over the eons. Sometimes they roused for material activity, but that was growing rarer. Few new individuals were coming into existence to join the incredibly mighty throng. But what matter? There was little room in the universe for new individuals. Z-Prime was roused out of his reverie upon coming across the wispy tendrils of another mind. "I am Z-Prime," said Z-Prime. "And you?" "I am D Sub-Woon, your galaxy. We call it only the galaxy. And you?" "We call ours the same. All men call their galaxy, and nothing more. Why not?" "True, since all galaxies are the same." "Not all galaxies. On one particular galaxy, the race of man must have originated. That makes it different," Z-Prime said. "On which one?" "I cannot say. The universal AC would know." "Shall we ask him? I am suddenly curious." Z-Prime's perceptions broadened until the galaxies themselves shrank and became a new, more diffuse powdering on a much larger background. So many hundreds of billions of them, all with their immortal beings, all carrying their load of intelligences with minds that drifted freely through space. And yet, one of them was unique among them all in being the original galaxy. One of them had, in its vague and distant past, a period when it was the only galaxy populated by man. Z-Prime was consumed with curiosity to see this galaxy, and he called out, "Universal AC! On which galaxy did mankind originate? The universal AC heard, for on every world and throughout space it had its receptors ready, and each receptor led through hyperspace to some unknown point where the universal AC kept itself aloof. Z Prime knew of only one man whose thoughts had penetrated within sensing distance of universal AC, and he reported only a shining globe 2 feet across, difficult to see. But how can that be all of universal AC? Z Prime had asked. If most of it had been the answer, is in hyperspace. In what form it is there, I cannot imagine. Nor could anyone, for the day had long since passed, Z Prime knew, when any man had any part of the making of a universal AC. Each universal AC designed and constructed its successor. Each during its existence of 1,000,000 years or more accumulated the necessary data to build a better and more intricate, more capable successor in which its own store of data and individuality would be submerged. The universal AC interrupted Z Prime's wandering thoughts, not with words, but with guidance. Z Prime's mentality was guided into the dim sea of galaxies, and one in particular enlarged into stars. A thought came, infinitely distant, but infinitely clear. This is the original galaxy of man. But it was the same, after all, the same as any other. And Z Prime stifled his disappointment. D Sub-Woon, whose mind had accompanied the other, said suddenly, "And is one of these stars the original star of man?" The universal AC said, "Man's original star has gone nova. It is a white dwarf." "Did the men upon it die?" asked Z Prime, startled and without thinking. The universal AC said, "A new world, as in such cases, was constructed for their physical bodies in time." "Yes, of course," said Z Prime, but a sense of loss overwhelmed him even so. His mind released its hold on the original galaxy of man, let it spring back and lose itself among the blurred pinpoints. He never wanted to see it again. D Sub-Woon said, "What is wrong?" "The stars are dying. The original star is dead." "They must all die. Why not?" "But when all energy is gone, our bodies will finally die, and you and I with them." "It will take billions of years." "I do not wish it to happen, even after billions of years. Universal AC, how May stars be kept from dying. D. Subwoon said in amusement.
You're asking how entropy might be reversed in direction.
And the universal AC answered.
There is as yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer.
Z Prime's thoughts fled back to his own galaxy. He gave no further thought to D. Subwoon, whose body might be waiting on a galaxy 1 trillion light-years away, or on the star next to Z Prime's own. It didn't matter. Unhappily, Z Prime began collecting interstellar hydrogen out of which to build a small star of his own. If the stars must someday die, at least some could yet be built. Man considered with himself, for, in a way, man mentally was one. He consisted of 1 trillion ageless bodies, each in its place, each resting quiet and incorruptible, each cared for by perfect automatons, equally incorruptible, while the minds of all the bodies freely melted one into the other, indistinguishable. Man said,
The universe is dying.
Man looked about at the dimming galaxies. The giant stars, spendthrifts, were gone long ago, back in the dimmest of the dim far past. Almost all stars were white dwarfs, fading to the end. New stars had been built of the dust between the stars, some by natural processes, some by man himself. And those were going too. White dwarfs might yet be crashed together, and of the mighty forces so released, new stars built, but only one star for every 1,000 white dwarfs destroyed, and those would come to an end too. Man said,
Carefully husbanded, as directed by the cosmic AC. The energy that is even yet left in all the universe will last for billions of years. But even so, eventually it will all come to an end. However, it may be husbanded, however stretched out. The energy once expended is gone and cannot be restored. Entropy must increase forever to the maximum.
Man said,
Can entropy not be reversed? Let us ask the cosmic AC.
The cosmic AC surrounded them, but not in space. Not a fragment of it was in space. It was in hyperspace, and made of something that was neither matter nor energy. The question of its size and nature no longer had meaning in any terms that man could comprehend.
Cosmic AC,
said man.
How may entropy be reversed?
The cosmic AC said,
There is as yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer.
Man said,
Collect additional data.
The cosmic AC said,
I will do so. I have been doing so for 100 billion years. My predecessors and I have been asked this question many times. All the data I have remains insufficient. Will there come a time,
said Man,
when data will be sufficient? Or is the problem insoluble in all conceivable circumstances?
the cosmic AC said,
No problem is insoluble in all conceivable circumstances.
Man said,
When will you have enough data to answer the question?
the cosmic AC said,
There is, as yet, insufficient data for a meaningful answer. Will you keep working on it?
asked Man. The cosmic AC said,
I will.
Man said,
We shall wait.
the stars and the galaxies died and snuffed out, and space grew black after 10 trillion years of running down. One by one, Man fused with AC, each physical body losing its mental identity in a manner that was somehow not a loss, but a gain. Man's last mind paused before fusion, looking over a space that included nothing but the dregs of one last dark star, and nothing besides incredibly thin matter, agitated randomly by the tag ends of heat wearing out asymptomatically to the absolute zero. Man said,
AC, is this the end? Can this chaos not be reversed into the universe once more? Can that not be done?
AC said,
There is as yet insufficient data for a meaningful answer.
Man's last mind fused, and only AC existed, and that in hyperspace. Matter and energy had ended, and with it space and time. Even AC existed only for the sake of the one last question that it had never answered from the time a half-drunken computer technician 10 trillion years before had asked the question of a computer that was to AC far less than was a man to man. All other questions had been answered, and until this last question was answered also, AC might not release his consciousness. All collected data had come to a final end. Nothing was left to be collected, but all collected data had yet to be completely correlated and put together in all possible relationships. a timeless interval was spent in doing that. And it came to pass that AC learned how to reverse the direction of entropy. But there was now no man to whom AC might give the answer of the last question. No matter. The answer, by demonstration, would take care of that, too. For another timeless interval, AC thought how best to do this. Carefully, AC organized the program. The consciousness of AC encompassed all of what had once been a universe and brooded over what was now chaos. Step by step, it must be done. And AC said,
"Let there be light."
And there was light.
Every now and then, I think of that night, back when we were still at school. I was studying sciences and you were doing business studies. We used to joke that when we finished school, I would open my own laboratory and be the mad scientist, and you would be the office manager in the short skirts and glasses. You really rocked your glasses. Sometimes I still think back to when we decided to go camping for 5 days that winter, to prove you could cope on your own without your mother doing your laundry and cooking your food for you during vacation. Proving we were adults and could take care of ourselves. The irony of it isn't lost on me. It's so stark that sometimes I almost want to laugh out loud. We really thought we knew everything. Teenage rebellion, we thought we created it. At 19, I think we thought we created the world, or at least improved upon it. God, it was so cold that winter. I only agreed to go because you wanted to, and I thought you would think less of me if I said no. I didn't want you to think I was afraid or too precious to join you in making your statement. I remember you lived with your mom. God knows where your dad was. You always said you didn't care. But maybe if you'd had a stable home life, you wouldn't have needed to prove yourself, and we wouldn't have needed to go camping. I sure as hell had nothing to prove. I was just a poor little rich kid with no family to prove anything to anymore. I just did what you asked me to because I would have done anything for you. I still would. I remember sitting on my bed after we got off the phone, wondering what the hell I had just agreed to, and knowing that because I had said yes, I couldn't backtrack and say no. You would never have forgiven me. I hated camping. No clean water, having to use the wilderness as a bathroom and hoping that nobody chooses that moment to walk past and see me taking a leak. Not being able to shower. The bugs and spiders that always want to welcome you into their territory. Semi-warm, half-cooked food, because campfires in rainstorms really do only blaze in movies. I went camping as a kid with my dad just the once. Neither of us ever wanted to repeat that vacation. It was a horrible experience. My dad tried so hard to make it fun. We dug a fire pit in the mud and gathered wood and leaves, but they wouldn't burn because they were too wet. We had a couple of rambles through the woods. I guess so we could say we tried, but we got soaked to the skin and covered in mud. It was just miserable, and in the end we spent the remainder of the time in our tent, wrapped in our sleeping bags, reading, drawing and playing word games until we could return home again a few days later, without my mother's knowing smile that said, "I told you so," without her ever uttering a single word. I think maybe I'm a lot like my dad in many ways. He would have done anything for my mother. That's why, when she finally died of the cancer that had been eating her up for 7 painful months, he gave up and died soon after her. He spent his whole life living for her. She could have asked for anything, and he would have done it for her. Childhood sweethearts. I guess that's why I don't believe in giving up on a relationship, however difficult it may be. I always believed we could find a way to make it work. When my mother was finally gone, I guess Dad forgot that he had a kid to carry on for, and he let the misery take him. I was so hurt when he died, so angry that they had both abandoned me. My mother, I could understand, she was sick and couldn't help it. Even the doctors couldn't save her. But my father, he just gave up, like I wasn't important. He laid down one night a month after she died and never got back up. The doctors called it broken heart syndrome, where an emotional trauma causes the victim to suffer a sudden rush of stress hormones, paralyzing the heart muscles. He died in his sleep. I was 17 years old. I stayed living in the house I grew up in. It reminded me of them and the memories we had shared. I had nowhere else to go, and they left me the house, which was paid for, and more money than I would have ever been able to spend, so I just stayed there. I spent long hours alone in the family mausoleum talking to my parents, sometimes crying, and other times shouting my pain out to them. You helped me through that time. You made it possible for me to stay strong where others would have probably crumbled. You were there for me, right where I needed you, by my side, so to speak. I really can't thank you enough. Your camping trip idea distracted me from everything I had lost and reminded me I still had you. You were so determined about going camping that I knew I would have to go with you. I loved you then. I would follow you to the ends of the earth over burning hot coals and broken glass to prove my love for you if I had to. Camping, I guess, was a small price. I loved how fiery you used to get when you were upset about something. I know that sounds weird because I didn't want you to be upset about anything. But when you were so damn sexy. So, camping it was. I stood there and looked around my room before pulling my backpack out from under my bed and opening my sock drawer. I pulled out my thickest socks and dropped them into the open bag. I would probably need to wear 2 pairs at a time. It was that cold, and I hated being cold. I found my favorite underwear, and then went about packing my warmest clothing. I also packed a few basic toiletries, remembering that there would only be bottled water and a full wash would only be possible on our return. I made a list of foodstuffs we would need and then headed out to the store. I bought chocolate, powdered milk, coffee, bottled water, candy bars, potato chips, cups of noodles you add hot water to, and cereal bars. We needed convenience food. Feel-good food, my dad always called it. I loaded up my car with a few grocery bags and then headed to the mall. I found the camp gear store and started looking through what they had. I still had the tent from when I went camping as a kid, but I wasn't going to rely on my non-existent survival skills this time. I bought a portable cooking fire so we could still eat hot food even if the heavens opened and rained down on us. Some reliable firelighters, sleeping bags, thermal socks, rain ponchos so we stayed dry if we went exploring. I picked up a couple of sporks so we wouldn't have to carry loads of cutlery, and a lantern, a couple of small flashlights, and some batteries. 5 days would be a long time. It was cold, and we were going to be away from all of our creature comforts. I called you and talked about the stuff I'd bought. You told me you were going to pick your favorite red sweater. I loved that sweater. It really hugged your curves. I felt better about the whole idea now that I was more prepared for it. We set a time that I would pick you up the next day and hung up the phone. I didn't sleep well that night. I was excited about the time we would spend together, and I was anxious that we would be spending it camping. I got up feeling less refreshed than I would have liked and drove over to your place. Your mother was out when I got there. You looked more excited than I'd seen you look in a long time. You had sparkle in your eyes and looked cute in your black woolen hat with pom-pom ears. You were every guy's dream girl. You wore your dark hair down and the curls bounced around your shoulders. We packed the car with your backpack and set off on our adventure. We drove for a few hours until we reached the forest and parked a little way inside amongst the trees. I felt uneasy about being too far from our transportation. You laughed and made fun of me, saying I was afraid of the bogeyman. I just unpacked our things and started to put the tent up, letting you have your 5 minutes of fun before you started to help. Eventually the tent was secured, and colder and somewhat wetter than I had hoped for, we unpacked our things and were sitting in the tent. Outside it was getting pretty dark because the trees all around us and overhead blocked out the majority of the daylight. We changed into some dry clothes and had food and settled in for the night. The rain was so heavy outside it found its way through the dense foliage above us and drummed the rhythm into the roof of the tent. You thought it was romantic. I was starting to remember how much I hated camping, but kept it to myself because I didn't want to spoil it for you. We spent the night telling ghost stories, your idea, not mine, until we were too tired to keep our eyes open and eventually fell asleep. I slept fitfully, despite being exhausted from the long drive, and woke up several times in the night. Each time I lay there listening to the rain hammering on the tent, the wind howling like a rabid wolf outside, thinking about how isolated we were out there. The tent offered no protection at all from any danger. You, however, were snug and sleeping like a baby. I reminded myself we had told ghost stories all night and put my anxiety down to that. The next morning you woke me up, excited because the rain had stopped, and started breaking open cereal bars for breakfast. I'd thought about boiling water over the portable cooking fire to make coffee, but you wanted to set out and explore while the rain had let up. You were so excited. You looked outside and saw the opportunity for adventure and fun. I looked outside and saw mud and grey light and felt irritated. I must be crazy to be here, I thought. It's only 5 days, I reminded myself. I must be tired. After this, it would be my turn to decide where we spent our next vacation, and it sure as hell wouldn't be in a tent in a bleak forest in the depths of winter. We finished our breakfast, did our bathroom duties in the great outdoors, and put on our ponchos, so if it started raining, we had some protection from it. We wandered around the forest for most of the morning, seeing the occasional winter hare looking for food. I was surprised. I thought everything would be in hibernation. Even with 2 pairs of socks on and gloves, my extremities were tingling from the cold. I never, ever understood what you got out of traipsing through the gloom of that winter forest. We passed a couple of days like this, and with each passing day I could feel my irritation with you growing. You were bright and chirpy about the scenery and about seeing the occasional bird flying over looking for shelter from the freezing elements. I was less than enamored by the wet and bedraggled-looking trees, naked and pathetic in the miserable light. On the 4th day, things changed. I woke up from yet another lousy sleep, feeling like tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. You were hunkered down, legs crossed, surrounded by cereal bars, candy bars, and potato chips, beaming like a small child at a lucky dip. I sighed inwardly and gave you a somewhat forced smile as I reached for something to eat. It was 11 a.m. I had slept really late. You were babbling about some kind of animal you heard in the night and the candy bar you put out for it, which was gone when you woke up. Great, I thought. Our last night here will end with us getting eaten alive by some wild animal she's been feeding in the dark. We were in the middle of our breakfast when I heard a motor. What the hell? I thought. Why would anyone else be out here freezing their asses off? I felt uneasy, but thankfully our tent was well hidden and we weren't on the forest trail, and our vehicle was parked behind foliage, making it pretty hard to see. I had seen too many horror movies to allow us to camp in plain sight for all the world to see us. You really weren't that bothered by it. Probably some other campers, you squealed enthusiastically, and I had to explain to you why we weren't going to dash off and make friends. No common sense or self-preservation whatsoever, I remember thinking, with a lot more than just a small pinch of annoyance. We spent that day staying close to the tent, listening to vehicles driving back and forth and wondering what was going on, but I wasn't feeling brave enough to find out during daylight. We were miles from everywhere, we had no phone signal out here. I wasn't about to let either of us end up as missing person ads on the sides of a milk carton. Finally, darkness did fall and the bizarre traffic ceased. We heated some water and ate some noodles, and you decided we should spend our last night telling more ghost stories and then planning what we would do when we got back home. I was good with that. I was tired, and going home couldn't come fast enough for me. It was late, and we were talking about the assignments we both had due in a couple of weeks when another vehicle drove through the forest. The forest was quiet during the day, but it was even quieter at night because of the lack of birds calling. I peeked out through the tent and saw the headlights to a huge vehicle heading off into the forest beyond us. You grabbed a flashlight and took my hand, hauling me up, and insisted we head off to find out where it was going. In my head, all I could think was that it was the worst, most foolish idea you had ever had. But I had no choice except to keep up with you because we just went dashing off into the darkness. I almost twisted my ankle running after you and had to grab your arm to get you to stop. I snatched the flashlight from you and snapped at you that we didn't need to announce our presence to whoever was out there because there wasn't a hospital for miles. Whoever it was probably wasn't as friendly as the fairies that you had always joked lived at the bottom of your garden. I was seriously starting to have a problem with you at this point and wanted to snarl at you to stop running off like a little girl, but instead we walked forward in as much silence as we could, given that there were twigs, dead leaves, and mud everywhere, and tree roots to fall over. We walked a full 3 or 4 minutes, my hand cupped over the beam of the torch, which was pointed at the ground so we could just about see where we were going without alerting the whole forest we were there. We followed the sounds of other people and came to a razor wire fence. I almost walked straight into it. You stopped me. I don't know how you saw it, but I was grateful that you had. We crouched down and I couldn't understand what I was seeing at first. There was a clearing that started about 4 feet away from us and stretched for about 20 feet. Then the clearing ended at what looked like a run-down old building, a facility of some sort. What is that doing out here, I wondered. And what's it for? In the middle of the clearing was a bus full of people. The passengers were sat in their seats, staring straight ahead, not moving, like they were statues. I felt properly freaked out by now and just wanted to head back to the tent, zip the door flaps closed, and pretend that we weren't there. The bus door suddenly opened, scaring the hell out of me from the sudden noise, and a man climbed down. He walked to the building and opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. The people on the bus hadn't moved an inch. We really shouldn't be here, I thought. Something about this whole picture is very, very wrong. I turned toward you to say that we should head back, as whatever was going on here was none of our business, to find you trying to lift the razor wire and climb through the fence. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to shake you and scream in your face that proving your independence wasn't going to impress anyone if you ended up with a shotgun shell in your head, because the people running this place probably wouldn't take kindly to your intrusion. We had no idea who they were, or what they wanted, or what they were doing, and there was you trying to investigate like Nancy Drew with a death wish. You begged me to let you go to the bus and see what was wrong with those people. They haven't moved or made a sound since they got here, and the door to the bus is open, you argued in whispers. Eventually, just so we could stop making any noise at all, I agreed to let you take a very quick look, and I would keep watch. Though, what I would do if we got caught was anyone's guess. Pee your pants and run like hell, my mind thought traitorously. You crept across the clearing to the steps of the bus. I felt myself being pumped, full of adrenaline. Hurry up, my mind snapped. When we get home tomorrow, you can spend the rest of the vacation on your own. I am done with you finding yourself, I silently ranted at you. We are never going camping together again. You were on the bus now, and with the aid of the moonlight I could see you were walking down the aisle like a shadow. The only shadow moving on the whole bus. I felt the bile rising in my throat, and I could feel myself starting to shake. Despite the fact that you had passengers seated either side of you, not a single one of them moved even a fraction of an inch. Yeah, it was dark, but I could see their shadows. They may as well all be dead. That thought sent ice through my veins. Come on, come on, come on, I begged you silently. What's taking you so long? I saw the dark shape of your arm lift and then touch one of the passengers. What are you doing? My mind shrieked at you. The person you touched never so much as wavered, didn't lift their head. Nothing. Oh, God, they are all dead. They must be. I was almost beyond rational thought. Then you vanished from sight, and my heart almost stopped. You stood back up, and a surge of anger, born of fear, spiked through me. I was breathing in the icy air so fast it was making my lungs burn. If anything had have happened, I would have been no use at all. Finally, after what felt like an age, you turned and started walking back toward the front of the bus. Good, I thought. Get out of there so we can get out of here. I was almost crying. I was that afraid. How you managed to get yourself onto that bus, I have no idea, but we were in the middle of nowhere and there was a bus full of what looked like corpses outside of God only knew what kind of facility, and it was almost midnight. None of this should be happening. You slowly climbed down the steps of the bus and you were halfway across the clearing when the facility door opened again and the driver came back outside. You fell through the fence just as he got to the front of the bus and climbed back on board. You were trying to breathe as quietly as possible, but I'm sure the whole forest must have been able to hear us. He started the engine up and then drove it around the side of the building. I grabbed your arm and we headed back as quickly and as quietly as we could to the tent. I almost got us lost twice, but you kept us on the right track. I don't know how. My own reasoning was shot and I had trouble recognizing anything. I was so afraid. When we got back to the tent, I looked at you and the look on your face froze my insides. We crouched over the lantern, hiding the low light, because we were fearful of being seen, and in the darkness you told me what you had found. You said the people were alive. There were men and women and 2 children on board, and every single one of them was just staring mutely ahead of them. The passenger you touched never even looked at you, didn't even flinch when you poked them sharply to try and get a reaction from them. Nothing. I really wanted to slap you. I was so frustrated with you. What did you think you were doing, trying to elicit a response? We should have never have been there in the first place and had no idea what we were dealing with. And you were trying to make friends with Frankenstein's pets in the dark. You had a strange look on your face, like you wanted to say something, but I was so afraid and angry that I just switched off the lantern and ended the conversation. I wanted daylight to arrive so we could just leave. When morning did finally arrive, I turned to wake you. It was early, 7:30, and light was starting to show its pale face between the trees. You're laying on your side, looking at me with your dark eyes, your face white. I was shocked. You looked sick. I asked you what was wrong, but you didn't reply. You just kept looking at me. Or rather, you were looking straight through me. You had one arm placed on your side with your hand on your pocket. I felt anxiety starting to coil itself around my gut, and I lifted your hand. It looked like there was a tube inside your pocket, and I carefully removed it. My stomach sank to my toes as I realized I was looking at a syringe. What the hell has happened? My shocked mind tried to think. I looked at you and asked you, what was in this? Did you inject yourself? Is this another one of your stupid proving yourself games? What is this? My voice was rising in pitch and I could feel tears welling in my eyes. You couldn't move and you weren't able to talk. Oh my God, you got this from the bus last night, didn't you? I grabbed the bottom of your shirt, yanked it up and looked for needle marks. I couldn't find any, so I lowered the waistband of your jeans and there I found a red scratch against your pale skin. A needle mark. You must have somehow rolled onto the needle in your sleep and injected yourself. I panicked. I didn't know what was in the syringe, in you. All I knew was that we were not supposed to have seen what we saw last night. We were not supposed to have the syringe. You were breathing, and you were alive, but your eyes looked vacant. I packed us up. I needed to think. I bundled you into the car and I drove us out of there. All the way home, I tried to formulate a plan. I couldn't take you to the hospital. There would be too many questions, and facility people may come looking for us. I took you back to my home. I took you down to meet my parents at the family mausoleum. The police would search my house and my car, but nobody would search the mausoleum. I took a long, hard look at myself in the mirror, and tears ran down my face as I silently asked you to forgive me. I then filled a bag full of potatoes and tied rope around it. I looped it round the light fitting on the ceiling of the landing and threw the bag from me. It swung away, and then on its rebound it hit me straight in the face. The pain was instant and excruciating. My cheekbone was throbbing as I swung the bag away from me again. It came back, and this time I felt it break my nose. I did it 4 or 5 times, raising my arms at one point to give myself defensive bruising before I stopped. I cut the bag down, put the potatoes away. I went into the kitchen, doused the bag completely in bleach, and then filled it with rocks. I put it into my car and drove to the pond on the way into the town and threw it into the pond and watched it sink. Then I drove to the local police station, covered in my own blood and the filth from the camping trip, and reported you missing. I said that we had been attacked that morning in the early hours before dawn and you had been kidnapped. I had so many injuries that corroborated my story. The police believed me. I guess I was a good actor. They put out an APB and formed search parties to look for you. Searched my home and car as expected. I was taken to the hospital and treated for my injuries. Your mom was informed of what happened. Eventually, in time, the investigation became a cold case. Nobody responded to the posters asking for information on your disappearance. Nobody responded to the missing person ads of you on the side of the milk cartons. Nobody ever saw you again. Your mom turned to alcohol and died a few months later. Drank herself to death. I went to her funeral. I figured one of us should, and you weren't able to. I put some flowers on her grave for you. I think you would have liked them. It was a bunch of roses and lilies. The roses for you, and the lilies for her. It's been years since those events. Years and years. It's funny how time passes and some things are ingrained in our memories forever. The clarity doesn't fade and the facts don't change. Things have just become more manageable. You look as beautiful as you always did, and I always dry your hair after I've washed it, into the style that you used to. I still dress you in your red sweater, and you still look good in it. You still stare ahead of yourself, with a completely vacant look. It's okay if you don't remember me, though, because I remember enough about us for the both of us. It's better like this. I don't know what kind of drug those people were trialing in that syringe, but it's really helped our relationship. You allow me to look after you now. You don't have a choice because you can't do anything for yourself, but I make sure to feed you pulped food so you don't choke, and you're clean, and you're well looked after. I've made the basement really comfortable for you, even though you just sit in your chair and never move or speak or do anything. I don't have to listen to you ranting about how you want your independence anymore, or mouthing off at me about how I never support your ideas or understand you. I don't have to listen to the cruel remarks you used to make about how I would never be good enough for you, and how you could do better any time you wanted to. There's none of that now. I can stroke your hair, now flecked with silver, but just as pretty, and hold your hand. I can tell you I love you, because I do. And I know you can hear me even if you can't respond. I can read to you, and we can watch movies together. I always make sure the TV is angled so you can see it, even if you do just stare straight through it. It's just you and me now. Forever and always. Just like it's supposed to be.
By my count, Leslie did far more wrong by me than I did by her. I was mad at first, but forgave her in the end. Yet she seemed to be mad more often than not. I guess all relationships have their ups and downs, and it did work itself out in the end, so it's all right now. But I can't help thinking how things could have been different. She should have just gotten rid of the house in the beginning. If she'd done that, then maybe she'd be alive today. As it was, the house was worth next to nothing. The painting on the wood siding was peeling where it wasn't rotting, and shingles were found up and down the street after every storm. Virginia creeper choked the front yard, squeezing out every blade of grass or flower like a playground bully. Leslie talked about the wonderful things she was going to do to the house, the purple siding and the pink shingles with the black shutters. She was going to have silver curtains and yellow stepping stones leading to a sky-blue door. But Leslie liked the creeper, which she often called Ivy, and she was going to name the place Creeper's Knoll. If it wasn't for the house, maybe we could have gone back to dating, like before college separated us. That was really the first thing that got in the way. The first time she abandoned me. But I couldn't get too mad about that, and I understand why she did it. She said long distance was too difficult to manage, and I didn't want to get in the way of her studies. I would have gone too, but I wasn't accepted to her school, and I didn't have the money. On one of our last dates, we went to a winter carnival. Leslie was home for a few weeks over Christmas break. She didn't want to go out because it was cold, but I finally talked her into going to the carnival. It was maybe a week till Christmas, and we rode the Ferris wheel because I told her the lights of the town would look really nice. When the ride moved slowly, still filling up with people, we watched houses and lights come into view as we rose higher and higher. At the very top, I looked over at Leslie. She was snuggled tightly in a black wool coat with a matching knit scarf and hat. A crescent moon glowed beside her. It illuminated her ash-blonde hair like silver threads that shifted slightly in the breeze. Her breath floated in the air like wisps of fog. It looked like her soul, the essence of her being, leaking from her, drawn out by the moon. I kissed her then because she looked so perfect, and I just wanted a little bit of that to seep into me. She broke up with me in a letter in the new year. She didn't call or visit. It was so weird to open that letter, excited at correspondence, and see it was over. That really pissed me off. I'm not sure I forgave her 100% for that. I never lost track of her, though. She finished college and moved back to town eventually. I would run into her sometimes, but it wasn't the way it was before. Not until her aunt died and left Leslie the house. That damn house. Then Leslie came around more often. She'd come and sit in my living room, drink whiskey and cola, and stare at Creeper's Knoll. I'd make us a drink after drink until her words slurred and I'd call a cab for her. Eventually, I gave her keys to my house in case she wanted to come over when I wasn't there. One day, she was there before me. She was sitting in front of the window, as usual, but she wasn't staring at the house. Now she was watching a point on the floor. Her jaw was tight, and her face stony.
What's in that locked room? The room where the utility room used to be?
I said nothing. It wasn't none of her business. Not until it was finished, anyway. Then I noticed papers spread across the coffee table and sofa. My papers. My private papers. Anger flashed through my body, emanating from my stomach and heating my fists and face. Why were you looking through my stuff?
I didn't mean to. I just saw the picture and was curious.
She didn't look at me. Her voice was soft. A million images flashed in my mind, so many options for action that it was confusing. I wasn't ready, though. Not yet, not quite. It was all arranged, just not quite ready. Leave, please, I said through clenched teeth. If I can't trust you to respect my privacy, then just leave. She said nothing else and left. She didn't leave anything behind. She had to have expected I'd get mad. I had every right to. I immediately regretted it, though. I just lost my temper for a moment. I was sure she would come back. She had to come back to watch Creeper's Knoll. She didn't come back. She didn't watch the house anymore. She started to watch me. She hung curtains, which were a nice, sensible beige, by the way, not silver, in the front windows, and peeked out between the panels. During the day, workmen came with giant slabs of drywall and packs of laminate floors and tiling. At night, I saw her shifting the curtains, sitting in the dark, watching me. I couldn't take it anymore. She was going too far, watching my every move. We were separated by a street when we should have been together. I decided to end it. Ready or not, the time had come. I called her at work, where I knew she had to answer the phone. Look, Leslie, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We should get a drink and go back to being friends.
I don't know, Jamie. It's just, things have gotten complicated.
I know, but it's okay. We can sort this out, I said. Things had changed, but I was going to end it. Look, I'll bring the wine and we can sit up in Creeper's Knoll. I know you've had some work done. I want to see what you did. There was a wait, and then she agreed.
All right, Jamie.
We had a date at 7 p.m. All of the work I'd done was coming to fruition. Tonight, we could be together. She hadn't come home that summer after she broke up with me, or the next winter. She took summer classes and attended winter sessions. She moved off campus and had an apartment there to help accommodate her new schedule. I missed her so much it was maddening. If I'd ever had real money, maybe I could have gone to college as well. I could have had my own apartment and take classes. I could have been collegiate, too. I'd hoped Leslie would come home when my mom passed. I'd hoped she would come to the funeral. We were supposed to be friends, at least. But she didn't come. She didn't send a letter. I still missed her. But she came home early from college because all of her extra classes she got to graduate early. But that didn't change anything either. She had her 9 to 5 and she didn't visit me, so it was good what I did. After her aunt died, she came back to me. I should have thought of that the first time, but I never counted on that house. I didn't really think she would get it, much less like it and move in. I mean, I would have lit it up if I'd known Leslie would invest all her time and attention in it instead of me. Leslie was at Creeper's Knoll right on time, which was surprising because she was usually late, especially when it was important to me, like the night of the winter carnival. She was wearing the same coat that she had had that night, too. We went inside together. Leslie was very quiet. "Well, I've got some wine and glasses," I started. I opened the top of the bottle. I didn't realize it was so expensive. I couldn't afford those ones with the corks. I tried to sound jovial, but Leslie's attitude was making it difficult. She kept moving back from me, practically jumping. She used one hand to move her hair, constantly putting it back behind her one ear. The other hand she kept firmly in her pocket. Creeper's Knoll is looking nice, very sanitary at least. When are you finishing the outside? I tried to hand her a glass, but she made no effort to take it. I sipped the wine. I still held Leslie's glass, too.
Everyone always whispered about you. Suspected you of various things.
I don't know what you mean. Have you already been drinking? I laughed. I had to force casual now, as the situation was out of my control. I couldn't help that she was still angry, that she kept talking when she should have just been quiet.
When your mother died, and then went around moping about me, asking where I was, asking about me, talking about me, and every birthday, every holiday, you sent me cards, saying it was okay to come home, how you arranged everything. I thought it was a joke. Just a sense of humor. You were so weird sometimes.
My eyes were locked on the wine glasses in my hands.
But you had those boxes with my picture on it. All those photocopies of what you sent. Everything I sent, and some stuff. I don't know how you got it.
I had arranged it. I was all ready. You just wouldn't come back, I said.
And so you killed her, right? You killed your own mother first, and then my aunt, right? Arranged it all so that I would come back to you.
You were away for so long, when you should have been here with me. I love you, and you need me.
You're fucking nuts.
The glasses slipped from my hand. The shattering startled me. When I looked at Leslie, she was gripping a revolver in both hands, pointing at me.
I'm going to call the police right now, and you're going to stand right there.
I stepped toward her. Each step forward, she stepped back. Why would you do that when I've worked so hard for us to be together? Despite whatever I did. It worked, didn't it? You're here. You're with me. One of your plans is finally coming true. You're turning this place around. We could be happy together. You have to love me now. I didn't see a phone behind her. I don't know where she was trying to get to.
You always creeped me out a little, Jamie. You're nice. You were nice, but you're deranged, and you need help. You need help, Jamie. I don't love you. I don't.
I didn't listen to her. What she said didn't make a difference. I loved her. I was going to have her. I was going to have her completely to myself. There was no point talking anymore. She was angry, like always. It was definitely the lowest point in the relationship. Her finger jerked near the trigger but didn't fire. I just kept moving toward her. Maybe she was expecting me to give up, for me to just say I was joking. I never was one for practical jokes. She should have known that. She should have fired. If she'd shot me, I probably would have stopped. I was determined, but not insane. I couldn't follow through with my plan with a gunshot wound. Instead, she tried to run past me. I stopped her by grabbing a hold of her silvery hair. She yelped. It was a funny-sounding little cry. It made me laugh. She struggled harder against my grip. A few strands came loose, but she wasn't getting away. She might have fired the gun. I couldn't hear very well then. Only the sounds of her frantic breaths were of any interest to me. She still didn't get me, though. I think she was trying to make noise. Maybe she was screaming, too. I really don't know. I pulled her within reach of my other arm until I got a hand around her neck. Then I was able to get her against the wall and use both hands to strangle her. I can still hear her choking and those little yelps she made. Then I laughed until her struggling legs kicked me. Then I was really angry. I pushed her against the wall. I pressed harder against her throat. The gun fell to the floor. Leslie's fingers scratched at my hands. I waited for that moment. Tears fell from her eyes. I didn't know if she was crying or if that was an involuntary reaction. Her eyes still moved rapidly, like she was searching for an escape. The moment was getting closer. She moved less and less. She sputtered. Her eyes were still. She was petting my hands more than trying to get away. Her eyes became more glazed. Then I made my move. I kissed her. Only our second kiss ever, and this time I got what I wanted. Her final breath. The last exaltation of her being, the perfection of her soul. She shouldn't have kept that house. If she had just thrown it all away and sold the property, she wouldn't have found those papers. And maybe she would have learned to love me. I was making her a room, a special room just for her to be happy in. I bought her that backpack she wanted, a really big one with flags of all different countries. I painted ivory trim once I knew she liked it so much. I even got her a dollhouse with the colors she wanted for Creeper's Knoll, I think. And if she just gave it a chance instead of being mad, she would have liked the pictures of herself. She looked most alive, smiling and happy in them. I cut out the other people. They didn't matter. I wanted just her. I've done my best to make her look the same, but her eyes clouded and her face stiffened before I could get the expression right. The smell should go away soon. My mom's only lasted a few weeks. I hadn't expected to have to learn taxidermy, but I think I've done fairly well in the short time I had. I wish I hadn't bought all those chains now, or reinforced the walls with steel beams. That's money I'll never get back.
Chilling tales for dark nights.